Hello, shalom. Um, Anybody who wants to join me is certainly welcome. Father Eric says Jacob has found a new friend to play with. Doug Wilson. Oh my. Um, so I actually reached out to Doug Wilson, and uh, they of course said that he would not come on my channel, which I expected. My channel was even smaller than it is now, but what I said to him was, um, what I wrote back to his organization was, okay, I don't expect Doug to actually uh, come on, but it would be nice if somebody from, ooh, Mr. Vanderclay. Um, it would be nice if somebody from his organization would join, and so we could have a discussion. Okay, I'm gonna let Paul take his phone call. And when he and they never got back to me, which if anybody watching this knows anybody on the Doug Wilson crew, please feel free to let him know. I would like to talk to him because I don't think he is anti-Semitic at all. And this was part of the reason I pulled up this graphic that I made not too long ago, which shows anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, and supersessionism. Which, funny enough, in his video, Doug misspelled how they can overlap and be separate from each other, and they can in fact be they can in fact be separate from each other, and oftentimes they bleed into each other. And frankly, I think if you are not Jewish, it is very hard for you not to be either anti-Semitic, anti-Judaism, or supersessionist. And so let me define my terms so people know what we're talking about. Anti-Judaism means that you reject Judaism. And unless you are some sort of perennialist, if you are not Jewish, and I include Noachides in the Jewish camp, then you're going to have problems with Judaism. You're going to reject Judaism. And so you're not Jewish. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with being anti-Judaism per se. I think you're wrong, but there's nothing bigoted, prejudiced in any way about rejecting Judaism if you reject actually Judaism. Anti-Semitism is something quite different. It is oftentimes irrational, so it's hard to actually define it well. But generally, if you are a Christian who believes that a Jew could never convert to become a Christian, then you're anti-Semitic. That's not really a anti-Judaism position. If you have racial views against the Jews, etc., that's something different. Supersessionism, and I forgive Doug for misspelling it. Many people do often, and there's a reason for that, because oftentimes they think it means to supersede Judaism, and that's not really what supersessionism means. Supersessionism is the idea that other people are now Israel or the Jewish people. And frankly, within Christianity, supersessionism is generally um, just incoherent. It doesn't. I mean, it doesn't work with specifically Romans 9, 10, and 11, because Paul of Tarsus very specifically talks about the natural branches and the grafted in branches, and how many Christians try to understand those grammatical superiority, how many people try to understand those chapters within Christianity is incoherent, and that's a problem. Now, I would not in any way call Doug Wilson anti-Semitic. In fact, the funny thing is that the dispensationalists tend to be so philosemitic, they fall into anti-Semitism as a bigoted type thing. And frankly, listening to some of the things that that Kanye says, even though he's obviously not thinking coherently, I don't think he's being anti-Semitic as much as he's being anti-Judaism. Andre, how you doing?
Hey Jacob, good. How have you been?
Good. You are echoing.
Am I again? Oh no.
It's probably your YouTube is still going. You have
It's
to
actually not.
when you come into stream.
1 second. That fixed?
It seems fine now, I think. No,
Yeah,
you're
Okay.
yeah.
I'll just fix myself.
So I would love to have an actual discussion with Doug Wilson if that was possible. Unfortunately, he hasn't joined, and I mean, and he isn't even willing to have somebody from his organization have a conversation about it. He has decided to make videos about this and about the Jews, and frankly, I think it's good that he's doing that. The only way there is going to be a coherent discussion is if he does in fact have a real discussion on these things, which we haven't had, unfortunately. You are muted. Okay, there you go.
Is this fixed?
I think so. Yeah, we don't. Yeah, you're not echoing anymore.
Yeah. Okay, good. The different headset fixed a few things. All good.
Okay. Yeah, headphones are good on when you're doing when you're doing StreamYard. So Andre, you joined. What did you want to say about this matter?
Well, so the laying over of like anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism is interesting because I think originally when I was looking to like figure out more things about originally like should I read the Torah or should I pursue like reading the Bible, and also deciding like I should learn more about like the Israel situation, like what do I actually know and what do I don't not know. I was over at the Portable server like ages ago, and one of the guys who was a mod there also ran a server called, I think it was, a Great Debate. And and I'm not sure if you remember it or were on it. Um, but it was essentially a place, I feel like, weekly debates, mostly between Israeli and Palestinians, um, about like the whole situation and different ways of approaching it.
Yeah.
And
Um, yeah, I
but
mean, unfortunately, like the whole Zionism thing very much complicates this, and I thought
mm,
about playing this video, which obviously this comes from a modern Orthodox. This video comes from a modern
yeah,
Orthodox, very much Zionist view. But here, let's listen to it.
We live in an age of miracles where the notion that the Jews are chosen, meaning at the center of God's plan in some mysterious way, I think seems pretty obvious. But it is something that many Jews shy away from.
Mhm.
But we have to be able to defend it, to defend that concept. Without, of course, without arrogance, with gratitude and humility and responsibility, and a feeling of responsibility and awe. But we will not be able to make the case for Judaism if we can't defend chosenness. We live
And ultimately, yes, the Zionism question gets into it partially because a lot of people are now, because of the state of Israel, looking at their globe, and they see or the newspapers, and they see Israel, and they open their Bible and they see the word Israel, and there's a convergence there.
yeah,
And yeah, the thing is, it's, for me, I don't actually really like the convergence. I think there are problems with it, because Judaism is not the same thing as Zionism, um,
yep, yep.
depending on how you define Zionism. And this has gotten to be a difficult discussion on my channel.
Yeah, I think it is an arduous one. My intention was not to sort of center things around the Zionism, it's like the heart of things. Just that seeing that the overlap of like the Venn diagrams are like it opened up some avenues of thought. So like the whole Kanye situation, right? And people are broadly sort of saying it's anti-Semitic, because that's the word they can attach to like anti-Jewish.
Mm,
And uh, when I was like on that server, I was hearing perspectives of situation which I didn't actually even think of there being like there was I think a few people were saying that the anti-Zionist Semites and there was anti-Semitic Zionists or something. And here I am thinking like, how does that work? Is that impossible? And
okay, so that comes from a misunderstanding of the word anti-Semitism. The word anti-Semitism and the word Semite have very different meanings, because the actual Semitic languages, right? Arabic is a Semitic language. And so when you talk about anti-Semitism as if it is, and I very much disagree with this, the idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I don't think it necessarily needs to be. The problem is, the word anti-Semite was a um, was a polite term for scientific anti-Semitism, for scientific bigotry and racial animus towards Jews, which was prevalent in Germany during the 1800s and 1900s. And so people were proudly anti-Semitic. And what's happened since is now there are Arabs who say that being anti-Semitic somehow means being against people who are Semitic, which is honestly completely wrenching the word from its actual meaning, because it's not a matter of Semitic languages and Arabs, and that's part of the problem is when we have these discussions, a lot of people don't know what they're talking about. We don't have clear vocabulary. And so the discussions fail in a lot of ways. And so there's a reason why I and many other people who are opposed to political Zionism no longer identify as anti-Zionists, because anti-Zionism has become an excuse for anti-Semitism. And anybody who walks into these waters, and this is really what happened with, so Doug Wilson, this video, which I do recommend, he starts by giving a glossary for even having this discussion of the relationship between Christians and Jews. And I'm glad he did it. Ultimately, though, I don't think he has a coherent view of the relationship between Christians and Jews, because frankly, very few Christians do. They're trying to reintegrate, trying to understand their religion in light of the new realities, since not only because of the Holocaust, but also because of the Holocaust, but also the state of Israel, and also the archaeological findings, which have been incredibly important and enlightening. And this is part of what makes this moment chiral, as John Vervaeke calls it. Paul, are you going to come on here? I don't know if he's listening or not. He may be busy, but he's kind of in the backstage.
It's not Jesus smuggling, is he? The backstage.
I don't know what exactly he's doing. He came on and then he immediately got a phone call. I don't know if he even knows that he's on here.
I saw him in the comments, so like I think it's sort of, he knows that he's here. Yeah, here we go.
Paul, are you here?
I am here. What are you doing, Jacob? I saw Doug Wilson on a thumbnail, and I thought, why did I get involved in YouTube? Brings me people like this, Jacob.
Well, he just made 2 videos on the Jews.
Oh, really? I don't follow his channel that closely.
I do. I love his channel.
Well, he's a really clever guy. He's terribly fun to watch. He's a very clever writer.
He is.
What's he saying about the Jews?
I mean, we could watch the video.
I don't have that much time. I got to make a video. I'm trying to do a sermon. I'm trying to do a commentary series
on Jordan Peterson's thing.
Of course, I got permission, man.
Yeah, I saw that. That was pretty cool. I was actually pretty disappointed in Prager's participation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was hoping he would bring. He's so Protestant. I was hoping he would bring like a wealth of Jewish tradition to the discussion, and he's very non-denominational Jewish.
Oh.
He has his own translation and he has his own views, and he has he doesn't have serious respect for the tradition. I don't think.
I believe that. I mean, he's mostly been kind of a political character.
He is. I mean, and he has this sort of religiosity. I mean, I forget. Was it me who said he's Jewish for Protestants?
No, that was Joseph.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a very true thing. He is he's he represents Judaism for a Protestant audience, and it's he's very, very Protestant in his Judaism.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me. Well, if we do this little corner Exodus seminar, I'm sure between you and Joseph and Hezi, we can get the straight story, or at least the diverse Jewish picture.
You're gonna have trouble with Yosef. He's still trying to finish his dissertation, and it's hard to get Yosef. I still have not been able to just get him to come on my channel just for a discussion.
Wow.
Chezi's been remarkably generous with his time because he's very excited with ecumenism, but ultimately it's because he's such a rabid Zionist. God have mercy on his soul.
Jacob, you're such an anomaly. You're such an anti-Zionist, and you just give your channel to a rabid Zionist to take over when you're not there.
Well, I've told both Yosef and Chezi that as if they weren't around, I would have to find somebody to fill their space to represent what is, unfortunately, a lot of mainstream Jews do not understand. And look, so my position is actually non-Zionist. And the reason why a lot of the religious anti-Zionists, Jewish religious anti-Zionists, have started calling themselves non-Zionists is because of what Andre was talking about, which is there's just so much anti-Semitism bound up in everything that calls itself anti-Zionism today, that it's become uncomfortable for the Jews who are seriously critical of Zionism what used to be the anti-Zionist parties, Jewish parties in the Knesset, now call themselves non-Zionist.
There are people in the Knesset that disagree with the state of Israel, its existence.
There's about 20 seats. Half of them are Muslim seats, and half of them are Jewish seats that are opposed to the state of Israel. Yes, out of 120.
It'd be like being a member of Congress and being opposed to the existence of the United States. There's a lot of dissonance.
Well, so I mean, it's when they first decided to run the anti-Zionist Jewish parties, when they first decided to run, there was a lot of disagreement whether or not they should run at all. And there are people who don't vote. Then they when they ran, they said we would never actually sit in the government. We would always sit in the opposition. We just want representation. We want our voices to be heard. And then they were offered positions in the government, and they eventually took them. And so the non-Zionist Jewish parties. Well, the funny part was, I think the last government included the non-Zionist Arab parties.
Makes my head spin. But anyway, what's Doug Wilson? I guess I'll have to see what Doug Wilson is saying about the Jews.
Well, he basically just gave a glossary, which is fine as an introduction. I'm sure he got called anti-Semitic by a bunch of people, and he got called philo-Semitic by a bunch of people. I'm guessing he's been called like a Jewish shill a lot. Yeah, well, I mean, the people who were looking towards him for Christian nationalism, right? So he's been trying to thread that needle of being anti-kinist while being a Christian nationalist, and he's also been chiding the conservative, the civic nationalist types, like Yoram Hozoni and Ben Shapiro and the National Conservatism Conference, because he thinks he's trying to be a Christian nationalist, and it's like, I'm sorry, it doesn't work. And unfortunately, I mean, have you been listening? He just printed a book called Christian Nationalism.
So somewhat their publishing house did that. There's been some drama around that because one of the persons was doing stuff on Twitter under a different name, tweeting out some. So I read a very interesting article about that, but I don't follow a lot of this stuff real closely. Wilson, I think, is part. So there's a little corner of Calvinism called Reconstructionists.
Okay.
Yeah. So you got these little stories to tell. So there's you know who Rushdoony is? Oh gosh. I'd be very curious to hear what you think about these people. So it's a little corner of Calvinists that basically are looking for something akin to the reconstruction of the temple.
So, like the dispensationalists. By the way, have I complained to you about how the Zionist Christians are funding Zionist extremism within Judaism?
Yes. So these Reconstructionists, there was one in seminary with me, and they're sort of like dispensationalist reformed. And Wilson's also a post-millennialist. So his Christian nationalism is tied into his eschatology. So there's a lot of, religions go deep and can get weird. And so even though Wilson and I are both sort of in the Reformed camp, there's a lot of ideas that he's got that a lot of, at least Dutch Calvinist people look at and are like,
well, he's an millennialist, and you're what?
No, I'm amillennial. He's post-millennial.
Post-millennial. Okay, and this is supposed to be important.
We're going to achieve the millennium together. We're going to bring God's kingdom here. Okay. And then when we've got it up to a certain point, Jesus is going to come down, and that's when we really get liftoff. He comes back after the millennium.
That part of the Christian eschatology.
Yeah.
So
there's you hear. I don't emphasize the dispensationalists will always have the premillennial stuff going on, and most amils like Roman Catholics, Orthodox, Lutherans, most sort of magisterial Protestants are sort of amil. But then in the 19th century, this post-millennial position sort of got going, and they're kind of a remnant of that post-millennial position. So it gets weird, and it's a lot. It gets there's a lot of trivia about it. So Wilson's a particular. He's got some particularities in his little town of Idaho.
Yeah, Moscow, not Moscow, Moscow. Yes.
Like here in California, we have Los Banos. Not Los Baños, Los Banos.
I always call it Los Baños. I didn't realize.
How are you doing, Andre?
Good. It's been raining a lot. And came on here. Actually, I had an idea to run past you for a video that we could do. Because in last few, I think, live streams you've done, you've mentioned the Return of the Prodigal Son, and it sparked some things with me. And the way you described it specifically, I found I think it's an interesting topic to touch upon, especially for the sort of things that people want to achieve in places like this little corner and so on. The idea of welcoming people in and and there's a lot more I could say about it, but it's so far it's been an idea that we could perhaps bring into power. But yeah, it's just been one thing of many in my head.
Well, it's pretty gutsy to say that on Jacob's channel in front of him. So my hat's off to you.
What's gutsy?
Well, just Joseph. Where do you stand on the parable of the prodigal son, Jacob?
I used to actually dislike it a lot more. I think the Christian interpretation certainly it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you see it from a point of view where it can be very Jewish if properly interpreted that way. A lot of Christians kind of have this view of it's saying that God doesn't actually care about the older son, which I think is a very bad way of seeing it.
Well, I agree.
And a more Jewish parable would have the father more the idea that the father would keep his son. So the thing is, if you view it as a parable of the Jews and the Gentiles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then a Jewish understanding would be that God destroyed his temple, destroyed his own house, because he wanted the older son to go out looking for his younger brother. That's a Jewish parable. That's a Jewish way of understanding the destruction of the second temple, of understanding it's how the Paul within Judaism people understand Romans 9, 10, and 11.
Huh. That's interesting. You always say such surprising things, Jacob. I always come away from my conversations with you with something to chew on.
I try my best.
You do. Well, I should. You just sparked my interest with the thumbnail. And then Vendonk called, and Vendonk and I had something we had to chew on a little bit. So sorry to.
Oh, which reminds me. Now that Amen turned me down, I'm probably going to try to steal Josiah away from you.
Exactly how would you do that?
I'm thinking Josiah might be the new Paul Vanderklay.
Oh, okay. You gonna get Josiah on video?
I'm thinking about it. I've talked to some people about it. Josiah seems like a candidate.
Josiah is a wonderful guy.
He is, and he knows this corner, and he's suitably Orthodox Protestant. He seems like a possible candidate. Yeah. I'm gonna have to talk to him.
That'll be very interesting. It'll be very, very interesting. So he just got, are you in one of Vendonk's groups with him?
No, see, this is the thing. Like the reason I didn't even consider Josiah until after Amen said no was
what did you ask Amen to do?
To be the new Paul Vanderklay.
Oh, okay. Because I'm fired after all.
Yes.
That's right.
Where's my crawl, Jacob? Where's my crawl?
Where's your what?
My crawl. The PVK is fired. Paul Vanderklay is fired. Come on, I expect a reception when I come. There we go. There we go.
If you want, I mean, if you wanted the job, you can have it back. But
well, but somehow
if you don't want the job
of your leader doesn't seem to that hierarchy seems to a little inverted.
See, this is the thing. You think of Gentile leaders. Jesus told you, don't be like the leaders of the Gentiles.
Oh, well, I gotta do some work, but I just saw that and I just wanted to jump on. So.
Okay.
Thanks, Paul.
Good to see you both.
You too.
Let me catch up on some of these comments, people. You don't like the Jews. I love the Jews. Is it a money thing? Money thing? No. Let's see. Is Zionism ethno-nationalism? Why or why not? Depends how you define the word Zionism, and unfortunately, too many people the way too many people define Zionism, it's frankly just racism, in my opinion. And there's nothing wrong with ethno-nationalism. I have no problem with ethno-nationalism. I have a problem with Jewish ethno-nationalism because I don't believe that Judaism is an ethnicity. It's not. If Judaism is an ethnicity, I'm not a Jew. My grandmother never made matzo ball soup, and never spoke Yiddish. So it's yeah. Okay. What's the whole Khazarian Ashkenazi thing? Is that even a real thing? Okay, so to explain, Khazaria was a country, actually a pretty large country, and much larger than I realized, that was between the Muslim Empire and Christendom about 1,000 years ago. And the king of Khazaria, quite possibly in an attempt to remain neutral, because they were in the middle of a war zone, converted to Judaism. And so this was an actual thing. So Khazaria was a nominally Jewish country, and at least the royal family converted to Judaism, and the country was nominally Jewish. Now, what happened was that there was a somewhat scientific theory that the Ashkenazi Jews were, in fact, mostly or predominantly or largely descended from these Khazarians who converted to Judaism. Now that we have genetic information, this has largely been disputed. Like it's not an actual thing. And frankly, if it was, it wouldn't matter, because if you convert to Judaism, you are a Jew. And this was actually one of the points that Doug Wilson did make on his in his video. We could watch the video and talk about it. But ultimately, it doesn't matter if Ashkenazi Jews are descended from Khazarians or anybody else, and if they're descended from converts or not, because the word Hebrew means to cross over. And we are a religious community. We're not an ethnic or even a real genetic community, right? So if your great-grandmother was Jewish, your maternal great-grandmother was Jewish, you're Jewish, even though the vast majority of your DNA is not. And if only your maternal great-grandmother was not Jewish, and none of your maternal line converted, then even though the vast majority of your DNA might be Jewish, and you might be ethnically Jewish, and you might have even been raised Jewish, which unfortunately happens a lot these days because of Reform Judaism does this. Conservative doesn't do it as much, but raising people who are not halakhically Jewish as Jewish, and this causes all kinds of problems. But this is a religious thing, right? And so whether or not Ashkenazi Jews are descended from Khazars, and by the way, my genes are very, very clearly from like native to the region of Syria and Israel. So, as a Mizrahi Jew, that this doesn't even really apply to me at all. But even if Ashkenazim are descended from the Khazars, which there's no, and the funny thing is, the guy who first came up with this idea was trying to, in fact, kind of reconcile how Jews really are Europeans and try to get in with the scientific anti-Semites, and because the Khazars, I believe they're Slavs, and it just backfired horribly. But that's the whole Khazar Ashkenazi thing, and well, Ashkenazi is real if you want to take a scientific genetic angle at real. So race realists will talk about endogamous communities. And there's a reason why we have so much information about the Ashkenazi Jewish community, because it is endogamous, meaning people who marry only each other generally, and has been for a long time, possibly not even voluntarily, but ultimately we have so much information because there was and continues to be so much genetic testing among Jews, partially because of all the genetic diseases that Jews have. And at least in Israel, with the mixing of the Ashkenazi and Mizrahi Jews, that's changed. And as we found out, surprisingly, with more genetic testing, large numbers of people who just general Americans, general Hispanic people, just general European people have Jewish ancestry, because Jews would pass into the surrounding neighborhoods, and we would take converts, which surprisingly there were actually a very large number of. So Jews are not as genetically distinct from the surrounding populations as people seem to think. He and Runner were big fans of Do Your Word. I have no idea who these people are. Where is the public Discord for this little corner? At best, Bridges of Meaning would be the public Discord server. I am not on that server. Lots of people are not on that server. John Vervaeke has his own server, and Jonathan Pajot has his own server. I am on the Vervaeke server. I have a very small server. Lots of other people have servers. But unfortunately, I don't think Bridges of Meaning really is the public Discord server. There should be a link to my Discord server on the thing. Oh, somebody joined. 3 people joined. Hello, people. I am going to allow you guys to have access to my server.
It's interesting to hear about the genetic testing of Jews and the diseases you were saying. So I didn't know anything about that. So it's like a highly hereditary thing. What particularly is it?
Well, Tay-Sachs is one of the biggest genetic diseases that Ashkenazim specifically get. But yeah, there are many. So anytime you have an endogamous community, like endogamy, frankly, if the Torah didn't require Jews to marry Jews, I would think it's a horrible idea.
Yeah.
Because when you look scientifically at it, right, you want a broad genetic base as you can. And most societies, what they would do when they took people when they won wars and stuff, they would certainly marry women, bring women from other communities into their gene pool, and that actually worked really well, right? And so scientifically, being endogamous makes zero sense. Like if you're a race realist, being endogamous really, really just does not make much sense at all. But race realists don't make much sense, so what can I tell you? Banson was a preterist and theonomist. I'm not exactly sure who you're talking about and what you mean. I just requested. Okay, yeah, yeah. The preterist view. I think you mean. Anybody else? Preterist. I mean, preterism. I actually assumed that all Christians were preterists, meaning that they believed Jesus had fulfilled at least some, if not all, of the prophecies of the Messiah in the Hebrew Bible. The fact is, there is not one. I do not know of a single prophecy of the Messiah in the entirety of the Hebrew Bible that Jesus uniquely fulfilled. There are Christians who will say there were things which had to have been fulfilled at a certain time, and therefore it must have been Jesus. But that's as far as anybody can seem to go. From my experience, if you identify with the older son, then you are the younger son. Interesting. Breaking
news. What is it? Oh, Paul Van der Klee's the new Paul Van der Klee. You heard it here first.
Live up to all my ex. Rick is okay. So if anybody else wants to join, or if you had anything you wanted to discuss, Andre, otherwise I am. Well, we could watch the actual Doug Wilson video.
Yeah, I'm not specifically here, but like I'm up for watching it. But yeah, I don't have any sort of further comments other than to say like I didn't come in here like saying these are my definitions of like Zionism, blah 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 blah. But they're just like I'm repeating what has happened in the past as experience to bring forward as like a talking point. And I think when you say like this guy has got like a glossary to work off and that it clarifies things, I think that's a very good idea because like even just personally, that would give me a point to go like, oh, so I'm conceiving of this like the wrong way or differently, and the comments you said to me about like the scientific anti-Semitism and so on, I knew nothing about that.
So let's
Introduction. At a recent meeting of Knox Presbytery, CREC, we adopted 2 short statements on ethnic issues. These statements reflect the position of our presbytery and were entered accordingly into our minutes. The first passed unanimously and the second with 1 dissenting vote. And that was only because he believed the second one was redundant, having already been covered by the first statement. The second thing our presbytery did with these statements is that we recommended them to the council of the CREC for consideration as memorials for our entire denomination. But as we think through that process, it is to be hoped that we have a good bit of discussion beforehand, and hence this post. Here are the 2 statements. On ethnic balance. We believe the human tendency to congregate around shared affections is natural and can be good. It creates the blessing of cultures and subcultures, for example. But as with all natural goods in a fallen world, there is a temptation to exalt it to a position of unbiblical importance, thus making it an idol. While an ethnic heritage is something to be grateful for and which may be preserved in any way consistent with the law of God, it is important to reject every form of identity politics, including kinism, whether malicious, vainglorious, or ideologically separatist, segregationist. Knox Presbytery, December 1st, 2022. The second one was on a particular form of ethnic sin. On anti-Semitism. We believe the conversion of the Jews is key to the success of Christ's Great Commission, and it is incumbent upon us to pray and labor toward that end. While apart from Christ, the Jews are, as all others, alienated from God. They have remained an object of God's care because the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. God's plan for converting them is for them to see Gentile nations under the blessings of Christ's lordship, thus leading them to long for the same. Hence, the cancerous sin of anti-Semitism has no place in God's plan. Knox Presbytery, December 1st, 2022. Even though Dave Chappelle recently cautioned us to be very careful, saying that 2 words should never go together, those words being the and Jews, we are going to hazard it anyway for the sake of your blessing and edification. What are Christians to make of the Jews? So then, to the glossary. This glossary is arranged in alphabetical order, so if you want to make any systematic sense of it, you may have to read through it twice. And some of the definitions and explanations will overlap.
What speed
This
have
is
you
not
got
meant
this
to irritate
at,
you,
by the
but rather
way?
to enrich your experience and your...
What?
Is this at 2 times speed, or is this like a
It's at
1.0?
1.5. Yeah.
What? I only went up. That's fine. Like, it's just a
I
little bit
usually-
quick.
You do things at 1.5. Here, I'll pull it down to 125.
Yeah, that's maybe a little bit better.
You're most welcome. Some of these definitions are not controversial, while others require more detailed argument than I can provide here. Hopefully that argumentation will be forthcoming, but today is not the day, and you will have to be content with bare assertions. Abrahamic faiths. This is a common way of referring to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, as though the fact that we are all people of the book minimizes the differences between us. While it is true that there are numerous historical connections and a shared history at many points, this could also be said of Israel, Edom, Ammon, and Moab. The fact that we all have a book doesn't mean the books say the same thing. Anti-Semitism.
Well, okay, I have to say this is a problem for Christians because if our book is part of your book, then like our book says what it says, and if you know that, and this will get more into it when he talks about Judeo-Christianity, but it's like if your book doesn't agree with our book, you have problems, and that's not my problem. That's your theological problem.
Anti-Semitism is the idea that Jews are uniquely malevolent and destructive in their cultural, economic, and political influence in the world. As defined elsewhere, ethnic sin is either malicious, vainglorious, or separatist, but the anti-Semitic forms of it usually tend toward the malicious. Ashkenazi Jews. Jews worldwide can be divided into 3 major groupings. There are the Middle Eastern Jews, Sephardic Jews, Spain, Portugal, and Ashkenazi Jews, Central and Eastern Europe. A common assertion among anti-Semites is that the Ashkenazi Jews converted to Judaism a number of centuries after Christ, and thus there's not a drop of Abraham's blood in their veins. This matters to them because over 90% of American Jews are Ashkenazi and around 50% of Israeli Jews are. A lot of what we identify as Jewish is actually Yiddish, Ashkenazi. There are 2 responses to this. One is that genetic research indicates that Jews worldwide all have a blood connection. The second reply is that it doesn't really matter if the Ashkenazi are all descended from some Turkic tribe that converted to Judaism centuries ago.
He means the Khazars, and yeah, he's right.
When Abraham was circumcised, his whole household, with hundreds of men in it, including his slaves, were also circumcised. Genesis 17:23. This means that a bunch of the first generation Jews, plank owners, did not have Abraham's DNA in them either. It has always been a matter of covenant, not blood. So for Christians, what this question should amount to is whether a tribe of people could bind themselves by covenant to the line of Hagar. Galatians 4:25.
And this is like the idea that it's the line of Hagar. It's like, this is where your religion becomes incoherent, but that's Paul's fault. And if you believe in Paul of Tarsus, that's just a problem you're going to have as a Christian. So,
and the answer is yes. Biblical scholarship. The fact that Jews do not accept the fact that Jesus was their Messiah has not robbed them of their ability to contribute significantly to biblical scholarship. From the time of the Reformation on, Christians have been noted for their willingness to learn particular things from the rabbis, including Hebrew. The fact that scholars like Robert Alter do not see their Christ in the text does not mean they see nothing in the text. Christian.
Well, part of the problem and why he has to say this is because Christianity only has its Bible, Hebrew Bible, because of the preservation of the rabbis after after Jesus, and especially Protestants. And this is where the Tradcats, Catholics, and the Orthobros will hit the Protestants the hardest, is the fact that the Protestant Bible is based on the Jewish Bible.
Yeah.
In these discussions, I use the word Christian in two senses. The first refers to someone who accepts the truth of the Apostles' Creed and who has been baptized in the triune name. This means that the individual concerned is not a Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, etc. The second use of the word Christian refers to someone who has the root of the matter in him and who has been born again to new life in Christ. This means that the individual concerned is not going to hell when he dies. Claims of the Messiah. Jesus is either the Messiah promised in the Old Testament or he is not. There's no real way to split the difference on such a question.
Correct. And part of the problem is Christians don't have a very good definition of the word Messiah, and it's certainly not a biblical one. And yeah.
If the claim is false, then Christians are guilty of perpetuating the most preposterous fraud. If the claim is true, then pious Jews studying the Old Testament are like Shakespeare scholars who have devoted their lives to the study of Hamlet, but who have...
I have to disagree with this. Just because the claim is false doesn't mean Christians have perpetrated a horrible fraud on the world. It means that they've done precisely what Maimonides said is the whole reason why Christianity exists, which is to transmit the truths of the Bible far and wide, while still, unfortunately, not having the fullness of the truth.
They failed to recognize the Prince of Denmark. As just mentioned, it is not possible to have Jesus be the Messiah, quote unquote, for the Christians, and not the Messiah, quote unquote, for the Jews. That might seem a mild form of relativism, but relativism...
I think, well, the Messiah, but that's part of the problem that Christians have with the term Messiah, which is all it means is someone who is anointed. The Bible very clearly calls Cyrus the Messiah of God, the Messiah of the Lord, of the Tetragrammaton, Mashiach Havaya, very clearly. Similarly, Saul is called God's Messiah. Similarly, other people, all the priests, high priests, prophets, the utensils of the temple are called Messiah. So part of the problem here is he has a bad definition of the word Messiah, and then he insists that it's all binary, whether or not. And it's like, how about you get your term Messiah correct?
Always metastasizes. Conversion of the Jews. In classical Reformation theology, the conversion of the Jews was the long hoped for, long prayed for event that was to usher in the evangelization of the entire world. Andrew Marvell refers to it in his poem about his coy mistress, and the Westminster Divines included it in their larger catechism. Question 191 asks what we should pray for when we pray for the kingdom to come. Among other things, we pray for, quote, the gospel to be propagated throughout the world, the Jews called, and the fullness of the Gentiles brought in. This was held because of their broadly shared interpretation of Romans 11, see below. Covenant. A covenant is a solemn bond sovereignly administered with attendant blessings and curses. This is the structure of all covenants, including the covenants that bind people in their unbelief. The Apostle Paul teaches that unbelieving Jews are in covenant with Hagar, not Sarah, Galatians 4:25, and that whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their heart, 2 Corinthians 3:15. Cultural disintegration. When previously stable societies start to disintegrate, as ours is currently doing, it is easy for distressed individuals to start looking for easy answers and readily identifiable scapegoats. When such a situation arises, hostility to the Jews frequently presents itself as a viable option. For Christians, it is not. Deuteronomic blessings. The Apostle Paul taught that the blessings to an obedient Israel in Deuteronomy are promises that are available to Gentiles through Christ, Ephesians 6:2. This reality is the hinge upon which his argument in Romans 11 turns. Deuteronomic strategy. The Apostle Paul wants the Gentiles to live under the Deuteronomic blessings of God's covenant kindness. This will result in high achievement by grace, as opposed to the high achievement by dint of raw human effort. The pattern for this is the great contrast set up in the magnificent movie Chariots of Fire. There, the Jewish runner, Harold Abrams, is a wonderful runner, but he is under the law. He is driven and eaten up with ambition. His counterpart, Eric Little, the Christian, is also fast, but not driven, rather carried. When he runs, he feels his pleasure. High achievement by grace is something that would provoke the Jews under the law to envy. Paul wants to provoke them to envy. Paul knows his people. He knows that this is a people upon whom this strategy will work. Living under Deuteronomic
Or so you think.
Yeah.
blessing is not a matter of merit, but rather is all of grace. Because it is gift, this makes it all look so easy. In contrast to this, the anti-Semite envies the Jew and resents his success. This is not anti-Semite so much as it is anti-Pauline, and at the end of the day, anti-gospel. So the Jews must envy us, not the other way around. And the only way this will happen is by grace, only by grace. Dispensationalism. It is recognized that there are various strains of dispensationalism, and that what is said here does not apply to all of them. But a common form of dispensationalism holds that God has two peoples, Jews and Christians, and that when the Jews rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, animal sacrifices will resume there, and God will receive those sacrifices, the book of Hebrews notwithstanding. The net result of this theology has been a form of Christian Zionism, and see Zionism below, under the Z's. Egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is a leveling impulse and resents anyone who, through hard work, grit, perseverance, and talent, makes them feel small and insignificant. See the next entry on envy. Envy. Because the Jews are a high-achieving people, they have a tendency to awaken envy among those who feel left behind or excluded. Tension between ethnic groups is frequently a competitive tension, and this should always be remembered. Ethnic sin. The modern secular world has made racism the ultimate sin, but it is a sin against their catalog of sins. But the scriptures do not teach us to group people by skin color, whether to praise or to blame. The Bible does teach us quite a bit about tribes, languages, empires, peoples, and more, and the theme of this teaching is that in Christ, all such distinctions are backgrounded. But backgrounded does not mean annihilated or vaporized.
So this is where Christians have to deal with there is no Jew or Gentile, man or woman, free or slave within in Christ Jesus. And frankly, I think it is the crux of the issue and part of why I brought up the whole thing. Ultimately, if he doesn't recognize that what we are seeing, which is the world coming to a realization that, in fact, what Judaism has taught always, which is that God, by his grace, chose the Jewish people to to have a special role in the world. So it goes back to what that clip that I showed before, which is, it's an uncomfortable thing many Jews are uncomfortable with, and frankly, a lot of Christians are uncomfortable with. But the priesthood of Israel, and the status of Israel as firstborn son, does not in any way mean that the Jews are necessarily going to be better human beings than anybody else. But it does mean that God has put us in a specific position as ministers to the world. And either you agree with that or you disagree with that. And if you disagree with that, you are disagreeing with the Bible and what I would say is clearly true in if you're looking at the world.
Yeah,
As Christians
also
interact.
so it's like it's not it doesn't have to be intrinsic to things that like we have to be comfortable with it. If it's like what divine will has commanded, then like whatever
If
that
it's true, it's
form-
true.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of people, including a lot of Jews, wish it weren't true. So this is from the prayer book. Ata bachartanu mikol ha'amim. You have chosen us from among all the nations. You have loved us and found favor with us. You have raised us above all tongues and made us holy through your commandments. You, our King, have drawn us near to your service and proclaimed your great and holy name upon us. And ultimately, this is a fundamental teaching of Judaism that a lot of Jews would prefer was not a fundamental teaching of Judaism. And too bad it is. And if I didn't believe it, I would reject Judaism. And, you know, if it's not true, Judaism is not true.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Things distinct from theirs, they must not give way to animosity or to patronizing vainglory or to separatist avoidance. Gospel. The gospel is the message that through Christ, through his sinless life, his death, burial, and resurrection, Israel finally got it right. Because of Christ and through faith in him, the incident with the golden calf can be forgotten forever. High performance people.
Well, this is a claim that Christians got it right. And I'm sorry, you look at human history and no, Israel still hasn't gotten it right. And the Christians still obviously haven't gotten it right. And if you're going to try to tell me that Jesus, through his death, did something spectacular among Christians, I would love to see some history of Christianity which actually shows that Christians got it right for the past 2,000 years. I think you're a very foolish person if you're making that argument.
People. For many reasons, too variegated to go into here, the Jews are a high performance people. This means that when they're bad, they are high performance bad. And when they are productive members of society, they are high performance fruitful.
Okay. There are many ways in which you can describe why Jews are high performing people. And I completely agree with him that when Jews are good, they tend to be very good. And when they're bad, they tend to be very bad. This is a fundamental teaching of Judaism as well. The question is why? And he can and probably would give me a lot of naturalistic ways of describing why that is. But ultimately, if you believe that the God of history is God and that all nature can do is display that which God wants displayed, and when you look at that and you see that it is reflecting Bible prophecy that is thousands of years old, I think maybe you need to recognize that actually Israel is in fact Israel and not the church. And this goes back to the question of supersessionism, right? And he does seem to be supersessionist, even though he doesn't know how to spell it. I'm going to keep on hitting him on that one. But when it comes down to it, if you believe that the Christian church is the new Israel, which Christianity taught for a long time, and he's going to talk about soft supersessionism and hard supersessionism. And yes, hard supersessionism is definitely anti-Semitic. That is the idea that, because the church is now the heir to the Torah, that the Jews have been disinherited. That's hard supersessionism. Soft supersessionism, I would say, is what most Christians believe. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily anti-Semitic. I would say that it doesn't conform with what we see in the world.
Well, also another thing was like, I can understand the high performance Jews thriving when they're doing well. I just haven't heard someone say when they do bad, they do very bad. And that's an interesting thing to think about, because why is it particularly like very bad rather than just a failure of being good?
Uh,
Um,
well, I mean, ultimately, there is a spiritual power and a headship, a priesthood, like a a place which God has put Jewish people in, and any any power that is coupled with free will, which it is, right?
mhm.
Like the Talmud says, "Hakol b'dei shamayim chutz miyirat shamayim." Everything is in the hands of heaven, other than the fear of heaven. Um, and so God has endowed the Jewish people with uh, a capacity to help shape history. Uh, and again, this is purely His grace and something that we should be very grateful for. And when you take power and you use it uh, well, you're using it well, and when you use it poorly, you use it poorly. And the position which God has placed the Jewish people in is I'm not sure I would ask for it. And I'm not sure you should ask for it. And I'm not sure a reasonable person would ask to be put in such a position.
So it's sort of say like, if it was anyone else, it's just like, oh, I did sort of good. I didn't do good, but because they are the chosen people, then you have that directionality and like amplification of
You have the
how well
amplification.
you right. That
It's like being part of the aristocracy in Great Britain, right? When you
mhm.
have the king, right? If King Charles is a bad king, that's going to affect a lot of people. And if
Yep.
King Charles is a good king, that's going to affect a lot of people. And did he do anything to be born king? No. He is in a specific position because he was born into that specific position. And to
Yep.
some extent, all of us have similarly some people are born to rich parents, and some people are not, and you do with what you can, with what you have been given, what
Mm.
you do. And it's it is foolish to find pride in having been born in a position where you can have a lot of um, effect on other people. All you can do is hope that you do the right thing. And
Yeah.
more than hope, I mean, you have to pray and work for it. So CW's been saying a bunch of things. Let's see what he's been saying. I tend to see the Christian readings of the Hebrew Bible as a lagging indicator and sometimes elaborate rationalization of a genuinely new religious impulse connecting the Hebrew God to Jesus. CW, just click on the link and come on. I have no idea what you're saying. That is to say, the living creator God who is love personified in the historical Jesus Christ. Yeah, God the creator cannot be personified. Which is precisely why it will always be a fundamentally idolatrous, if not blasphemous, proposition for Jewish thinkers and believers. Yep. The idea that God can be personified is
Mm.
idolatrous and blasphemous. Um, I'm watching 20 Minutes Behind, but if you, I'm too off topic yet. What do you think of the whole Ashkenazi Jews run the banks thing? Debunk, add to, correct. I would point you to Thomas Sowell's book,
Mm.
um, Black Rednecks and White Liberals, and his chapter on middleman minorities. Jews have been middleman minorities. Ashkenazi Jews have been middleman minorities in the West for a very long time. And the position of middleman minority in the West is what it is. It's that of a functionary. And if actually, like, when you look at, for example, Yoel Roth, right, who was the person making a lot of decisions at Twitter,
Yeah.
and ultimately Vijaya Getty and Jack Dorsey are the people who were the actual people in charge, right? They hired Yoel Roth to do their bidding, and now Yoel Roth is being blamed for doing the bidding that they hired him to do. And the question becomes, why are you focusing on Yoel Roth instead of the board of directors of Facebook, the people who are actually in positions of power, Jack Dorsey, Vijaya Getty, who got paid millions, and now somebody who was a minor functionary, Yoel Roth, has become the face of this entire thing. And I think, somebody said it's because he's Jewish, and I kind of jokingly and kind of not jokingly said, maybe Vijaya Getty really is that smart to hire Yoel Roth, knowing that he would take the blame if it ever came to that, which it has. Why is everybody focusing on Yoel Roth instead of Vijaya Getty? I just think white people are trying to look for someone to blame for their problems and not wanting to take responsibility and move forward. The whole concept of white people is itself silly. It really is. Even if Jews run the world better than Christians, they'd just start burning a heretic at the stake. Is there a parallel between the people of Jerusalem killing Christ and the story of Cain and Abel? I would say Christians often would make that parallel. I would actually say that the parallel is more with the Romans killing lots and lots of Jews. But that's me. I've read the Thomas Sowell book. It's very good. It is. And I think what he says about middleman does apply to Jews.
And good. Anti-Semites frequently point to the high preponderance of Jews among the Bolsheviks, say, or pornographers, or the Frankfurt School. What they don't do is point to the counterpart phenomenon when we are talking about violin masters, or patent holders, or Nobel Prize winners, or the Austrian School of Economics. Holocaust denial. In talking about the Holocaust, we need to be careful to define terms. Our language has been so corrupted that we now take any form of disagreement as a denial of quote-unquote undisputed facts. Thus, we now have climate denial and election denial and so forth. If a historian decided, after exhaustive research, that the number of Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust was actually closer to 4.9 million than to 6 million, he would be risking his livelihood and career because of how easy it would be for him to be tagged as a Holocaust denier. But he is denying nothing, just disagreeing with others about the math. So I want to reserve the phrase Holocaust denier to someone who just flat claims that the entire thing was a Russian slander on the German people, that there was no final solution, and that the stories about the gas chambers were greatly exaggerated.
Yeah, I agree with him very much about this.
A Jew is someone who has a shared ethnic and cultural heritage with other Jews going back to the time of Abraham. Proselytes have been grafted in.
I disagree. A Jew is somebody who, according to the religion of Judaism, is part of Israel. And this has gotten kind of strange with the revitalization of Noahide, the status of Noahide within Judaism, because frankly, I think Noahides, in a very real sense, by Western standards, should be considered Jews.
And during that time, but as mentioned above, this does not alter the covenantal connection. With this as their shared experience, Jews differ widely among themselves with regard to what they believe. There are secular Jews, Reformed Jews, conservative Jews, and Orthodox Jews, not to mention others. Jewish humor. One of the things that makes anti-Semitism such a difficult thing for me to understand is that I so appreciate the distinctive Jewish sense of humor. Okay, hands up. This is not my strongest argument, but I'm still going to include it anyhow. One time, shortly before Hitler took power, one of his brown shirts was walking down the street and walked past a Jew going the other way. As they passed, the brown shirt sneered and said aloud, "Schwein." The Jew just tipped his hat and said, "Cohen." Jews
I love this joke.
and Galileans within the pages of the New Testament.
Okay, so this is one way in which Christians try to understand their Bible, and distinguish between Jews and Galileans.
Mhm.
I don't think it works, but it's popular among some people and apparently popular among him.
Clear distinction is made between two kinds of Jews, Galileans and Judeans. But the Greek word Judaios can be translated either as Jew or Judean. Given the way the New Testament highlights the differences between the two regions, I think it makes sense to render a number of the passages that are.
This is an attempt to fix up what is an obvious problem with parts of the Christian Bible. And frankly, I think it's much more easily resolved by recognizing that the Christian Bible has been corrupted by a lot of ignorant anti-Semites.
That are usually translated as the Jews differently. Thus, quote, "And therefore did the Judeans persecute Jesus and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day." John 5:16. Judeo-Christian.
Yeah, he's trying to defend the Gospel of John, which ultimately I think is indefensible.
Tradition. I believe that this phrase is inaccurate at worst and anachronistic at best. The Judeo part of the tradition comes from the fact that Christians never abandoned the Old Testament the way Marcion wanted them to. There is therefore
They didn't? Really? Are you sure about that?
commonality between the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition, but not a great deal of commonality. Not so much that we could call it one tradition. Again, the place of Jesus is not a detail. Need for the gospel. As sons of Adam and daughters of Eve, the Jews, like all other human beings, are dead in their trespasses and sins. Apart from Christ, they are utterly lost, like all the rest of us, and need to be converted to God if they are going to live forever with him. Romans 11. In Paul's illustration of the olive tree in Romans 11, he says that unbelieving Jews were cut out of the olive tree, and the Gentile branches, wild olive branches, were grafted in. Romans 11, 17 through 29. This olive tree is the tree of the Abrahamic covenant. Paul's argument is that if the excision of the unbelieving Jews was such a great blessing to the Gentile world, what will their reintroduction be for the Gentiles but life from the dead? Thus, many Reformed and Puritan theologians have for centuries thought that the conversion of the Jews en masse was the linchpin for the future evangelization of the world. Supersessionism. Supersessionism is
He misspelled it.
Again.
the linchpin for the future evangelization of the world.
Yeah, I wanted to screen cap this, but I couldn't. I couldn't find it before. But like, yeah.
I'm on my phone, so it's hard to like zoom in. So where is the spelling mistake in this?
He spelled it with a C, and it's with an
S?
There are no C's in supersessionism.
Right.
It's
Okay. Yep.
spelled this way, supersessionism on the bottom.
Yeah, I've got you. Yep.
Yeah.
That's funny.
I mean, when you're making a glossary, you should.
It's a schoolboy error.
Supersessionism is the belief that the church is Israel now. All the promises of God are fulfilled in Christ, and only there. 2 Corinthians 1:20. This means that the promises given throughout the Old Testament are the present possession of Christians, not Jews. For the Jews to live under these blessings, it is necessary for them to be grafted back into the olive tree. Having said this, there's a distinction to be made between hard supersessionism and soft supersessionism. Hard supersessionism believes that the prediction made by Paul here was fulfilled in the 1st or 2nd centuries, and so there's no future conversion of the Jews to look forward to. Modern ethnic Jews have no unique standing with God at all and must come to Christ the same way that Swedes, Tibetans, Japanese, and Argentinians must come. The soft supersessionists are the ones who believe that the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable and that the natural olive branches, still detached from the tree 2,000 years later, are yet to be grafted in again. Soft supersessionists believe that Jews are lost without Christ, but believe that as a people, they still have a role to play in the history of redemption. Talmudic Judaism. After the temple was destroyed in 70 AD and the Christian faith was firmly established as a going concern by the 2nd century AD, the rabbis who had not turned to Jesus Christ had a problem.
See, so this is the bad history, which a lot of Christianity is based on, but absolutely indefensible. The Pharisaic Judaism was very solidly based on the teachings of the prophets during the first interregnum, which is the destruction of the first temple. And
Yeah.
so our Talmudic Judaism is the Judaism that Jesus and Paul experienced, because they were living during the Second Temple period and
Mhm.
going to synagogues. That's the
Right.
important thing. We are the continuation of the synagogue, and Christians abandoned the synagogue, possibly because they were mostly Sadducees, but possibly because they just didn't know any better.
How were they to maintain their distinctiveness from the Christians when they no longer had a temple and hence could not practice the Judaism of the Old
We went to synagogue just like Jesus and Paul did.
Testament? Their solution to the problem was the development of what we now describe as Talmudic Judaism. The thing to emphasize for Christians is that this is not the religion of the Old Testament.
It's the religion of the New Testament. That's the funny part.
There are many connections to the Old Testament, but this was a faith that came into existence after the time of Christ.
No, it is the faith that Jesus had.
Zionism. Zionism is the belief that Jews have the right to live in their ancestral homeland and that this homeland is roughly the territory of the modern state of Israel.
Okay, this is a view of Zionism that I actually agree with. That this is describing a Zionism that is part of Judaism. This is not political Zionism. Political Zionism, which I oppose, is the idea that that human beings can affect how this promise comes to be, which is not true, because ultimately this is a promise from God, which can only be rendered to us through means ordained by God.
Israel.
Yep.
Zionism as a movement began in the 19th century when they had no territory, and their dream was realized in 1948 with the establishment of the State of Israel. When Zionism was first establishing itself, the claim was a scriptural one. This was their ancestral land, and it was a de jure claim, with them saying that they had a right to the land. Whatever you make of that claim, Zionism is now a de facto reality, with millions of people living there on the basis of the earlier Zionist movement. This means that someone might live in Tel Aviv and not be a Zionist, and someone could be a Zionist and live in Brooklyn. These things can be complicated. I don't agree with manifest destiny, but I still live in Idaho. Suffice it to say that leftist anti-Semites are prepared to grant the claims to ancestral lands to pretty much anybody except the Jews.
What's
So
Manifest
that
Destiny
was-
again?
Manifest Destiny in the United States was, and of course, Chazi is being Chazi. Manifest Destiny is, in the United States, it was a belief among Christians that it was their religious duty to conquer the entire world. And so they saw the new world, and I guess Australia as well, as a place that they needed to, it was their destiny to actually colonize, to not establish, what's the word I'm looking for? Settle the entire earth, right? So any territory that wasn't settled, they thought it was their religious duty to settle. And so that's how the West was settled in the United States. And he gives the example of himself living in Idaho. He doesn't agree with Manifest Destiny as a thing, as a theological something he agrees with. At the same time, he lives in Idaho as a result of Manifest Destiny.
Yeah.
Imagine putting your angry emails into the scripture. Equals Tarsus. What part of the Christian Bible is corrupted? the parts that were written in Greek. It means we have a right to exist. Okay. It's written in heaven. Say what you will, manifest destiny is one of the coolest phrases ever. Just like the oral Torah, the Jewish people together with God can manifest the return to the promised land together. You can decide to look at the return as a fluke or has God's guiding hand, or I could agree, as I do, with the Satmar Rebbe. Manifest destiny means you to written in heaven. You have a mansion here.
You get to be
means-
written to heaven, perhaps.
Oh, you get to be written. Okay. You have a mansion here means you have one in heaven. I'm not sure I
Okay.
understand.
Maybe say like if you have a mansion in America with manifest destiny, then you'll like the theological right gives you that mansion in heaven as like a
Okay.
product of it if you spread it. I don't know. No, I'm not sure.
Okay. I think I told you only the parts that were written in Greek. And yes, apparently you were right. So, which parts of the Christian Bible are corrupt? The parts that were written in Greek. Those are corrupt. Okay, I am going to end this broadcast so I can call some of my clients, and then we will talk. I am probably going to do another just chatting stream later.
Cool.
So you're welcome to join.
That's very interesting insight. Like I learned quite a bit though.
Cool. And yeah, I mean, if people have questions and there's comments, please like, subscribe, all that jazz. And shalom.